Hello and welcome back. In this video we'll be looking at possessive pronouns. Words that let us say mine, yours, and everyone else's. When we talk about ownership, we need to use possessive pronouns. And if you remember from a previous video, pronouns are words like I, you, she, etc. And they're words that stand in for nouns. They make our conversation less repetitive. We learned the nominative forms before, and if you remember the antecedent, the word that the pronoun is standing in for, the antecedent of a nominative pronoun is going to be the clause subject. Well, we have different forms of the pronoun to express ownership. And now the pronoun is going to stand in for the noun that would be the owner of something in the clause. These are very much like the English possessive pronouns. We have, instead of I, you, etc., my, your, his, her, its, our, and their in English. Now, if you remember, the more common a form is, or the more common a word is, the more it tends to be irregular in form. And that's what we get in the first person pronouns. The nominative, if you remember, was ego, I. And the possessive form really doesn't look anything like ego. In fact, the possessive form is more regular. And as we learn more about Greek pronouns, we're going to see that the rest of the first person forms look very much like mu or emu. But for the moment, because ego, the nominative, was quite irregular, we really don't see much connection between the nominative and the possessive form here. But the possessive form of the first person pronoun, my, is mu or emu. Why do we pick between mu or emu? Really, it mostly depends on pronunciation. So if the word that came before ended with a vowel, it is fairly easy to say mu, because you can slide from the vowel sound to the mu at the beginning of the word. But if the previous word didn't end in a vowel, if it ended in a consonant, more often than not you'll see emu used. But there's no real difference in sense between the two. The second person pronouns follow a clearer pattern. Here the stem is the consonant sigma, and we have su in the nominative, but then do you notice in the possessive we have an ending omicron upsilon, and we're going to see that ending coming up in other possessive kinds of forms in the next badge set. In the third person, the stem isn't sigma anymore. Now the stem is out, alpha upsilon tau, and then we just add on to this the first and second declension noun endings. So the masculine nominative form, he, is autos. His is going to be autu. And do you notice that's the same ending that we saw on the possessive form for the second person, su. In the feminine, the nominative was aute, she, and the possessive is going to be autes, her. The neuter nominative form was auta, and the possessive form, its, is going to be autu again. And do you notice that the forms for the neuter here, possessive, and the masculine possessive are identical? That's something that we're going to find in several places throughout Greek, that the neuter forms and the masculine forms in the second declension are very often the same. So how do we use possessive pronouns? I could say he mater emu, and that would mean my mother. Notice that emu, the possessive pronoun, doesn't come in front of mater the way it would in English. It can come afterward, it can come before. The word order is flexible. We can say su to teknon, your child. We can say thugater autou, his daughter, or a daughter of his. Remember that, again, word order is very flexible, and so all three of these sentences mean the same thing. He is my father. Autos ho pater mu autos, and mu autos ho pater. There's no difference in meaning between these, except perhaps a slight difference in emphasis. So given how flexible the word order can be in Greek, how do we put the words of a clause together when we're reading? How do we figure out which words go with which? One strategy is to start in a verbless clause with the nominative words. Find all the words in the sentence that are in the nominative case. So I've highlighted here now autos and ho pater, both in the nominative. Since this is a verbless clause, there's no verb here, one of those is going to be the subject and the other is going to be the complement. So is this he, autos, is a father, ho pater, or is it the father, ho pater, is he, autos? Probably it makes a little bit more sense to take it in the former sense. Take autos as the subject and ho pater as the complement. So let's highlight it that way. I've underlined autos to remind us that it's the subject, and I've inserted the little word is to remind us that this is a verbless clause, and that although there isn't a visible verb, both autos, the subject, and ho pater, the complement, are modifying that implicit verb to be. They're explaining who it is that exists, and they're explaining what is the mode of that existence. He exists, and he exists as ho pater, the father. Now, we still have a word left over, and now we can ask, which word does mu modify? And it makes sense often to try first reading the sentence as if it modifies the closest word. So what if we take mu to modify autos? What would that mean? Well, that would mean my he is the father. That doesn't work very well, does it? So what if we look around and see another nominal in the sentence that mu might be modifying, and we see ho pater. Maybe, even though it's all the way at the other end of the clause, mu is actually modifying ho pater. If we take it in that sense, what would the sentence mean? It would mean autos, he is ho pater mu. He is my father. So the core of the clause is he is the father, but then mu modifies ho pater and tells us more about it. It's not just the father, it's my father. So even though mu is at the beginning of the sentence, when we translate it, we would shift the idea of ownership back to the end of the sentence with ho pater and say, he is my father. Often in Greek, it's considered good style to separate a modifier like mu a fair distance in the clause from the word it's modifying. Partly because it makes the sentence a little bit more interesting, makes it a little trickier to read, and the ancient Greeks seem to consider that a sign of good style. Now, when we're looking at it, one thing that helps is that usually the words aren't separated quite so far like that unless it's going to be clear from context that mu can really only modify ho pater. So usually the Greeks don't make it too ambiguous. If really it'd be unclear to have the words far apart, the Greeks will tend to put them close together so that it's easy for us to recognize which modifies which. But if in context there isn't anything else that mu would make sense to modify in the sentence, then the Greeks would feel quite free to put it wherever they like.